What does school leadership look like in real life beyond titles and organisational charts? In our launch episode of School Leadership Matters, host Darta Hovey sits down with school improvement leader Kendall Aglinskas to unpack formation, trust, and the first conversations that shape confident, ethical leaders. From launching our leadership program Aedificare across the Sandhurst Diocese to the everyday practice of leading people, Kendall and Darta discuss what helps emerging leaders say yes, build capability, and keep students at the centre. Together, Darta and Kendall explore the Aedificare program, its purpose, reach, and what participants are really asking for. How relational leadership shows up in practice, from building trust to timing tricky conversations and returning to the why. And ways to navigate seasons of leadership so life changes don't mean stepping away from impact or ambition. Leadership shows up in the classrooms, teams, and the decisions we make every day. This episode offers practical steps, candid stories, and a clear invitation to keep growing wherever you are on the journey. So let's explore what truly matters in school leadership.
Welcome everyone, I'm Darta Hovey. I'm so excited to present the first of our podcast series of School Leadership Matters, and even more pumped that today I have Kendall with me from our school improvement team. Kendall, welcome.
Thanks, Darta, and I'm really energised to be on here with you today for the inaugural podcast as well.
We're actually going to be talking about something I know you have a real deep passion for, and you've been involved in creating a key initiative in our diocese around our Aedificare program. My first experience of Aedificare was actually back in 2014. A great friend, Adrian Drone, who's sadly no longer with us, created the program at Notre Dame in Shepparton, and I was invited to do a presentation back then. But you have a bit of a richer experience with Aedificare. Can you give us a bit of a background as to what you've done in the program in the schools you've worked in?
Yeah, so I first experienced Aedificare back at St. Joseph's Echuca when I started, and I think that was around 2014 or 2015 in that space as well. So I was actually a participant in Aedificare back then. That was my first experience with it. And then when I moved to Assumption College in 2016, that was a program that we started and continued running with at Assumption. So I've been a participant of the program. I've helped co-lead the program. And it's been great to take it back to the diocese where it started as well and do it throughout Sandhurst.
So I'm guessing through your time at Assumption, there were a large amount of staff that went through the program. Did you just have the staff of Assumption, or were you using staff from any other schools nearby?
So we first started with the Assumption College staff, but then we actually expanded it. So next door to Assumption College is St. Pat's, our big feeder school. So they came on board, and then also our Ladies of the Way in Wallen as well. So it was really great to have the three schools working together throughout the Aedificare program and just creating richer dialogue as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think what you're highlighting already is here around this emerging and aspiring leaders that we have across our school communities and across Sandhurst. So an opportunity for everyone to be highly engaged at that starting point in their career. And even those who have got the maybe I want to be a leader, is a real opportunity for them to start that conversation. There's a quote in the outline that we sent out in all our documentation for Aedificare, and nobody is born with all the knowledge and skills required to step straight into leadership. Why is formation so important, do you think?
Well, Aedificare itself actually means to build or to construct. So I think, in terms of those building blocks, formative leadership is so important, and it's so key to everything that we do within our diocese, but also across Australia and across the world. We know that everyone's a leader. You don't just have to be in a position of leadership to be a leader. You're a leader in your classroom, you're a leader at home, you're a leader in a lot of different ways. And I think that the building blocks that Aedificare can bring can just open people's eyes to what does that look like, transferring some of those skills that I might have running a soccer match on the weekend through umpiring or doing a scouts troop. How can I bring those things into my actual leadership role or into my professional life in a school setting as well? So I think it's really great in that sense to just open people's eyes up to what could I become?
Yeah, for sure. And I think you touched on a great point there, that there are so many things in life where we lead. Yet sometimes when we think about bringing it into a school setting, there's the question, I don't know if I'm ready for that, or I don't have the experience. Yet in our daily lives, like sport coaching, you're doing it all the time. So I think it's a really good opportunity for us to open up that perspective a bit more around, you've got some skills, how do we continue to form them within the context of our school settings? You've run 2 sessions. I've run one with Tim Edwards. You've had the opportunity to hear some themes that are coming through. Can you touch on a few of those? What are some of the themes that you're hearing around what are people comfortable with? And then maybe what are they looking for more formation in?
So in the couple of sessions that I've run, it's really good to hear that people are feeling comfortable and confident in their relational leadership skills. So working with others. And I think it goes hand in hand with Catholic education. You know, we are human people. We see each other as humans first. And I think that's really an important thing to think about. But where there's been some, I guess, trepidation or hesitation, it's really around a few things. Firstly, the sense of difficult conversations and being able to have those difficult conversations with your peers, sometimes with other leaders, and, you know, that kind of professional dialogue where you're challenging one another, but in a professional way. And I know that's really been a hesitancy that some of our participants have had. And the second thing that's coming through is really around leading the management of the school. So things that you might not be exposed to as a classroom teacher, or as a middle leader, or even as a deputy until you actually get to that final step of principalship. So things like budgeting, you know, the finances, master planning, things that you just don't do in your day-to-day life as a teaching staff member.
Absolutely, and that's part of our role to form, isn't it? So if we're looking right out to that end of principalship and deputy principalship, we now have more in place to actually help form that level of leadership. And when we bring it back down to that early level of leadership, I'm hearing you say the importance of listening and dialogue is that real first step as we walk forward, and having the confidence to actually have that first conversation, to step over the line and to be able to have a difficult conversation or a tricky conversation that 9 times out of 10 actually isn't like that.
Yes.
It's actually the fact that you've got enough energy and you're pushing yourself forward to finally have that conversation that could be one of those ones that's actually keeping you awake at night.
Yeah.
And then the next day you sit back and reflect and go, oh my goodness, that was just so easy. Why was I so churned up about that? Is there another takeaway in that space around development for these younger leaders that are coming through? And I mean young as in formation and time, not actually age.
Something that when we ran the panel session, they really spoke around, because there was a lot of questions around this idea of the difficult conversations and how you approach them. Something that they all really spoke around was the why, you know, making sure you have the why. And if you have the why and pair that with students at the centre, then you can't go wrong with that difficult conversation. And I think, you know, a lot of the times young aspiring leaders are really hesitant because they're thinking, oh, you know, they're going to react in this particular way, or they're going to be really frustrated that I'm calling them on something. But at the end of the day, you know, we're all here for the kids, you know, we're all here for the growth of our students in front of us. So I think having that why that's really clear can actually help dilute that conversation and the fears around that conversation. I don't know, is that your experience,
I'd
Darta?
agree with you there, because before you're going into those conversations, I think you've really got to go back to the why. And it's not and I would say even for myself, there's a bit of rehearsal that happens before the conversation to go, so why is this important? I'm doing this because, and you'll come back to the kids every time.
Yep.
The heart of the decision is often around what's best for our school and in actual fact, what's best for our kids in this space and place. So if you can base yourself in that, it also gives you the ability in those difficult ones, because occasionally you will have someone actually want to go back at you again and again. And that's really then looking at it and trying to just adjust your sails. So maintain course, maintain speed, keep having that conversation, but just adjust your sails so that you come at it from a different angle. But you need the rehearsal, I think, from my perspective. That's how I try to work through those spaces.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also knowing when the time is right. That's really important with some of those conversations. And that was a topic that came up on the panel discussion. You know, not doing it too close to the event so the emotions are really heightened, or not kind of pulling them out of class where they've got to go back in and, you know, work with students where that's a bit uncomfortable. So I think, you know, those can be really tricky as a young leader to try and navigate. But I think, understanding the why and the students at the centre and leaning into those difficult conversations, you know, don't avoid them, but also the timing is really important with that too.
Yeah, we touched earlier about something from my own development about eating the green frog, not avoiding those opportunities. And I think that was me as a younger leader. I certainly would procrastinate a little bit too long on some of those challenging parts. When we think about why we're doing Aedificare, it's very much based around forming our people, growing our own. And I was in the early stages of we've put the information out, we're looking at how many people, we're all a bit excited. Oh, we've got 30 people, we've got 40. We've got roughly 90 people engaging in the Aedificare program, which just blew us away. And it highlights the importance of us as a system being able to grow and retain, but also encourage people to join us on the journey. How did you feel when you heard we had 90 participants in the program?
Oh, I was so excited, particularly because this is a new format to doing Aedificare, doing it online like this. We didn't know if people would lean into that or buy into that. It was outside of school hours. There were a whole heap of factors and people really had to commit to the entire program. That was something that we really focused on as well. Yeah, I was a bit hesitant at the start thinking, how many are we going to get? Is this actually going to be, worth our time? And we were putting on all these great panels and speakers, but it's been fantastic. And I think not just the participant numbers, but also the diversity of the participants. We've got people from early learning centres joining us alongside primary, alongside secondary, and then even people from our office staff as well and our administration staff. So I think that's also something to celebrate is the diversity of the program because it is about leadership in general with an educational twist.
Exactly. And everybody can be a leader in our school community.
Yes.
I think the moment you step through the gate within our schools, and whether this is virtually or whether this is actually being present there, we're all leaders in one shape or another. And I think that's so important that people have the opportunity to engage no matter what part of Catholic education Sandhurst they play. So I think it's so important. Can we pivot here just for a minute? Let's talk about, Kendall, when did you first start leading? What school were you at? What year are we talking about?
Well, that's a great question. I guess it's depending on whether we're talking about formal leadership roles or those informal ones that we know definitely come up within schools. So in my first year of teaching, I had the opportunity to take Year 12 English straight away, which was really exciting. I think that was probably my first dapple with that leadership style and looking at some of the other people that I was working with and trying to model myself around them. I was a 21-year-old when I first started. I used to park 3 streets away so people couldn't see my P plates on my car still. So, I was very aware that I was only a few years older than these students. And I remember at Echuca, they used to do a welcome barbecue for all the Year 12s and their families. And I did get a few looks and, parents wanted to ask, how old are you?
Yeah,
Can you actually do this? But that was a great year, a great formation year for me. And I've taught Year 12 ever since actually. Yeah. But I think something, that I guess my formal leadership role would be junior English coordinator. So I was in charge of Year 7, 8 and 9 English, which was really great. I was also the public speaking and debating coordinator. So that kind of happened 2015, 2016. And then from then, I've been in mostly curriculum development roles, but also professional practice leader within that. So more leading the staff side of things. So I had 3 years at that role. And then most recently, deputy principal learning and teaching at Assumption. And then now school improvement leader. So
an amazing broad set of opportunities there for you. If you think through that period of time, reflect on one leader or a group of leaders you've worked with. What are some qualities that stand out for you that you really admire in leaders? Because this is what we've been doing with Aedificare at the very start. We were trying to get people to consider what are those qualities that really resonate with you and potentially your growth going forward. So what about yourself? What are some of those qualities?
I think being a relational leader is the key and at the heart of everything that we do. There's so many things that go along with being a relational leader. It's developing trust within your staff, within your students, within your wider community. So I definitely think trust is a foundation. And I think, leading back to the difficult conversations, if you have trust, all of those things become easier. If you've got the trust in the staff that you are doing the right thing for the right reason, I think leadership is easier than what it could be. I think the great leaders that I've looked at are great orators, they're great speakers. And that's something I was really drawn to as, someone in high school that did public speaking and debating, and that's quite close to my heart. I think that's a really key thing that I knew I could work on as a leader. And I think I've continued to do that throughout. And I think that's something that I would definitely recommend to people is looking at your public speaking skills because while we're really confident in front of a classroom, a lot of us struggle when we go in front of a staff and then even more so if we go in front of our peers in a wider setting too. So I think that's definitely a quality I've looked at and really admired from people. And then the last one I would say is just really courageous leadership, people who aren't afraid to push back and to question and to challenge. I think this notion of professional dialogue is so significant and so important. I've been a part of some really great leadership teams where, you have these discussions and I guess debates, robust discussions because you all care and you're all coming from different perspectives. But when you walk out of there, it's not impacted you personally. You're not taking it personally. Everyone's still professional with one another. And I think that's a really key part of leadership too, is being able to navigate those potentially challenging conversations, but doing it in a way where it's respectful and professional the entire time.
You're really touching on trust there and the ability to build that culture of trust in a school community. And everyone would agree there's enough research worldwide now and there's a whole industry built around trust in leadership.
Yes.
What are those key little moments where you know that trust is there within your teams?
That's a great question, Darta. I think when people are open and honest with you about what's happening, not only in the school setting, but also in their personal lives, I think that's a key takeaway to know that they trust you as a leader and as their leader, but also as a person, that they know that you've got their back. I think when you can have performance management conversations or conversations around areas of growth for your leaders, and that both people in that conversation, myself and the leader that I'm talking to, are coming from that place of wanting to be better and wanting that growth to occur.
Yep.
I think that's really significant as well, because if they don't have that trust in you as a leader, then they're not going to listen to any feedback that you're giving them.
So you're talking also here, you mentioned earlier around modelling, some of the modelling you've seen, and certainly in the public speaking, which I know you're very good at. That's been a part of your journey. Have there been other skills there that you've thought, this is a growth area for me, and how have you built that skill over time?
Probably the biggest one for me was when I was going for the professional practice leader role, which was on the leadership team, so on the executive. It was the first time that I'd gone for one of those roles. I was asked in the interview around, having difficult conversations with people that you're friends with. And I think in schools, they're communities where you are building friendships around you. So many of our friends come from where we've taught and where we've been educated. And I think that was a really interesting question. And I really took that and thought, how would I actually approach that? Because I think when you're distanced from someone, it's a lot easier to have some of those challenging conversations.
Yeah.
But when you're close with them, that's a bit of a different situation. So that was something that going into that role, I had in the back of my head this little bit of how am I going to deal with that? And then my first year of that leadership role was COVID. And so it was very interesting learning to do that role from home. It was a different type of role than what had been previously done as well. But in that role was also having to have some challenging conversations with friends and really making sure that they knew that those conversations were coming from me as their leader, not from me as their friend. And I think that's something that actually came up in the panel discussion on Aedificare too, is making sure that the purpose is really clear of the conversation, but also everyone's roles in that conversation are really clear. And I think that's reciprocated too. If people who are my friends would come to me and kind of, want a bit of a debrief, as we do, walk into someone's office, something's happened, you need to just debrief about that student or that parent phone call or whatever it might be. They'd sit there and I'd start to ask the question, probably about 6 months into the role, are you telling me this in my role or are you telling me this as a friend? Because they're two different things, and how they want me to react are two different ways of reacting. So I think that was a really interesting learning for me that took time, because I have such great friends, on the staff that I've worked at, but it was a really important lesson for me as a leader, and to really make sure that there was that division and separation.
Yeah, I'm confident we would hear a similar theme across many of the leaders in regional and rural settings, because
definitely.
You can be the heart and soul of what is a small community.
Yep.
In many of our communities, we know that there's a shop, there's a footy club, and there's a school. So you are entrenched in those communities. I agree with you there. I've also had the experience of over times of actually asking friends are coming in for those conversations on staff to say, do you want Darta the principal or you want Darta the mate? Which space are we playing in? You can see the relief. Okay, this is a friend conversation. Just want a debrief. And then there's the other one. No, this is a deeper one. I really need your advice on how I work with a staff member in this particular space. Or more often than not, it was actually more parents and students. So I think you're really touching an important point around growth in this space, around how do you prepare for those moments. And I think there's a real opportunity here for our staff to know that you're not there alone. And it may not be the principal you want to speak to, or it may not be the deputy, but as you're building your leadership and starting to form, consider those people that you trust and have those conversations with before you walk into that next phase. I know too, I can be a little impulsive at times, so I still do that today and just test the waters with colleagues or friends, that you just want to know that you're stepping in the right space rather than stepping on a landmine. And that can be so easy in leadership at times.
Definitely.
I'm reflecting on that relational side of what you were talking about just before. One of the great opportunities I had through my career back in Ararat was watching a leader model consistently, no matter what their day was like, every day they had lunch in the staff room. Didn't matter how difficult that day had been, didn't matter the challenges that were happening in the community, they were present. And they wouldn't sit in the same seat all the time. They'd rotate around, but they would have the conversations and they were present. I think that presence is sometimes quite difficult. And in our space as a SIL and your space at the moment, they're new challenges because we are moving around our school communities. So I'm interested in this new role of being a SIL. How do you support our schools through your new role?
So School Improvement Leader is different than anything I've done before. I would actually say it's almost an amalgamation of every role that I've done before and then some. And it's been really great and really inspiring to actually see the different leadership that's happening around our diocese and great things that are happening around our diocese too. So I think in terms of the role, I've probably been inspired and feel like I've grown as a leader just as much as I'm hoping that I'm helping the leadership teams in the schools around the diocese as well. So I guess to sum up what a school improvement leader role is, it's like that lovely part of the contract where it says, at the principal's discretion, you can do anything else. That's what it feels like the SIL role is. It's a bit of everything. So, this week, for instance, I've talked about a school closure because the water mains went off during a building project. I've had conversations around performance management. I've had conversations around parent complaints that are escalating. It is really a day-to-day, totally different feel. And I think it's helped to upskill me as a leader because I've not been, as significantly involved in things like the budgeting process or the finance process before, or even staff hiring, not from the interview and that sort of process, because I've definitely been a part of that, but from the contractual part of the process and actually writing, I guess, those higher role descriptions and even principal interview panels, things like that. So I think it's been really great that every day is so different, and I've felt really energised by
Fantastic.
it. Yeah.
And what are some of the takeaways you've got from, say, doing activities like, I've just seen the work come through, it's been brilliant work around deputy principal interviews and the process that comes with that, because it's so attached to leadership and leadership formation. What are some of the things that you've noticed about what we're creating in this space?
I think it's exciting that all of us are moving forward together. And I think that system leadership idea is something that I haven't experienced before, because obviously when you're a part of a school, you're thinking, it's the school leadership moving forward in the same direction. And I also have been involved, have taught at 2 schools that are RIMPJP schools as well. So they're not actually part of a diocese. They're actually sitting outside of that. So I haven't had that system feel before. So that was very new to me. But what I love is that we are all moving in the one direction and trying to create clarity across all of our schools. So people going for deputy principal roles at a school in Bendigo and a school in Wangaratta are actually getting a similar experience, a similar process. There's known factors. There's not that unknownness, I guess, that, you're worried about when you're going for these different roles. So I think that's been a really significant thing, is to make sure that we're aligning what we're doing across the diocese. And I mean, we still have a ways to go, but I think we're making good strides.
And what are you looking through in that process? So and again, we've got a lot of aspiring leaders that are working through our Aedificare program at the moment. When they're looking for that next stage, and let's say they might apply for a leadership position, or they might consider within their administration team going for another role, what are some of those little keys that you would suggest to them as they look at the opportunity to move up in their career?
I think the really key thing is being a yes person and kind of leaning into anything, like any sort of opportunities they get, even if they don't think that it's something that's within their wheelhouse. So I find, looking at even graduate teachers, they're so engaged and so invigorated, and they say yes to everything. They want to go to every school camp. They want to be, choreograph the school musical. They want to be part of the debating team. They're really saying yes to everything. And I almost wish that energy kind of stayed. We see it as well with preps or with year 7s. They start off so gung-ho, and then there's this lull as they kind of stagnate a little bit. And I think we see a little bit of that in schools, because you get so involved in your job. Your job takes over, and the day-to-day of the teaching world takes over too. And then you get to a point where you're probably like, this is probably the right time for me, because of my age, because of my experience level, because I've maybe just completed a master's, that I take that next step. But you haven't necessarily been leaning into the things that you could have throughout. Yes. So I would say, that's a really key thing, is lean in to everything, say yes to things. But the other is to also be really aware of your weaknesses or your areas of growth and work on them, whether that be within your own school, going to your principal and saying, hey, I've never done anything to do with budget. can I sit in on some meetings, or can you, give me a little session on budgeting? Or whether that be, knowing in yourself that you're struggling, I don't know, with group activities within your classroom or something like that, or facilitating dialogue and conversation within, a senior English classroom, and thinking about, well, who on staff can I actually pair up with and say, hey, can I come watch your lesson, and can you come and give me some feedback too? So I think, knowing the people around you and being able to do that. The other added bonus that we have as a system is, and I hope this is where we're moving forward in the future, is actually to allow that buddying up to happen across our schools, because we are all one system. We're all working very similarly on Magnify Sandhurst. So it's a really great opportunity now to kind of think, okay, cool, well, is someone in the school down the road that I know is really, really great at leading the management side of things, maybe I can tee up with them and do a couple of days shadowing them in their role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the importance of our system leadership, creating opportunities for these people we're talking about are in Aedificare,
Yes.
but then moving through the leadership opportunities that we create and build over the coming years. So in essence, we're starting a network that hasn't even been called a network, but this is what it will be in time. And I fully agree with you. The opportunity to buddy up, to understand how other people in middle leadership are working together, because we do focus a bit on principalship and deputy principalship. We grow this next cohort that are coming through that are really keen to learn and to understand how to lead in the communities they are. I think you've also touched on something. It's the little things, taking the little things, the little opportunities that present day to day, and sometimes scratching the itch. If you've got an interest in what might be some instructional coaching as we come forward with Step Lab, let's look at the opportunity that might present to understand that a bit better and be at the front and centre to start to work with those other leaders in your school community to better understand how you might play out in this space yourself.
And I think there's that difference between formal leadership and informal leadership too. We have so many opportunities in our school to be leaders within your year level team or within your subject team or things like that might not necessarily be recognised, but you taking on that leadership role in terms of how are we going to collaborate on this, or you talking about the instructional coaching, or hey, let's give some feedback to one another about how this activity is going. All of those things are actually adding to your leadership repertoire, and they're things that you can talk about in interviews when you are going for those more formal roles, which I think is really key. There was a question that came up, Darta, actually at our panel that was asked by one of our members of Aedificare that was around if you are wanting to go into that next step of leadership, but maybe you're in a small town or you're in places where there's not necessarily those opportunities to do so, what advice would you give? And I'm just wondering, what advice would you give in that situation?
Yeah, straight away reach out, just like this person has reached out. But there are opportunities if you are remote or if you're in a space where you don't have a lot of opportunities to collaborate. Podcasting, like we're doing right now, I've listened to 2 podcasts from Lencioni on the way over here, and one was on trust, and it was actually virtual trust. How do we create virtual trust when so many of us are now in meetings, Zoom meetings, whether they're Microsoft Teams as we use here? How do you create trust when you're not always with each other in that relational sense? That's an example. Podcasting, taking the opportunity. We talk so much at the moment about knowledge-rich curriculum. Are we talking about knowledge-rich leadership development? Are we reading? Are we taking the opportunities to have conversations? A good one that you've touched on just before is if you know of someone close by, can you catch up for an afternoon? Can you have a catch up, whether it's virtually or actually being in the school, to see what that's like? Many of us went through the period of time where you were shadowing another person for a full day, and that can be pretty complex these days, and making sure that you can get relief to make sure you can do that in a school setting. But what are the other ways around doing that? I think it's a real opportunity. But first and foremost, conversation with the leaders in your school, absolutely. Look at the resources that are available within the PD that we offer over the coming years, but also can you jump into that podcast space? Can you find really good literature that's worth reading? And I'm not saying jumping out and grabbing a novel, but are there opportunities in online blogs that you can utilise to actually build up that space? Kendall, you're in a really interesting moment, a really interesting phase of your life at the moment. What does that look like in a leadership lens for you right here, right now?
A bit of fear at the moment, Darta, can I say, from a professional and a personal sense, obviously. So, about to have my first baby, and it's a really interesting one. I have been thinking around being in this role this year and being pregnant, as opposed to, if I was pregnant last year as the Deputy Principal Learning and Teaching, how would that be different? There's definitely, I guess, less pressure in some ways being in this role, and I feel like I can go and think that everything is absolutely sound and wonderful. But there's that little inkling of fear of, what am I going to miss out on? How long am I going to be away for? Because you do have a plan, but obviously that might change. Who knows what's going to happen? What does it look like when I'm coming back? I've never obviously worked part-time, but I've watched some really great friends go through that transition from full-time to part-time after children, and that's really difficult. Childcare centres calling you up because you've got to leave, and all of these different things. So, super excited about growing our family, but at the same time, there is that apprehension, which I think is very natural for anyone, who's going through any life changes in terms of leadership, but probably particularly women.
I'd agree. We touched on earlier around what would it look like if you were in a school space as a deputy principal, say at Assumption where you just left, and what would that mean? And the last thing you want to hear anyone say is, I think I have to step away from leadership. That's not the story that we want to have going forward, but how do we as a system and how do we as our schools continue to make sure that opportunities do stay not just on the table, but growth is there for everyone who is moving out to have babies. And I think it's a really rich opportunity for us to think about as a system. How do we continue to support
I think
these
so.
opportunities?
Like I've heard people say before, oh, I'm not going to go for that role because we're trying to get pregnant, or I'm not going to, go for this again, or I'm not going to stay in this role, or I can't come back to this role because I'm coming back part-time. And that's really sad because I think, they're great leaders. They're not. It's not that their leadership is compromised in any way because they've had a family. But it's just this perception that we have that perhaps it might be too difficult, or there's that worry about not being absolutely perfect in your role and not absolutely meeting probably your own expectations, to be honest, rather than anyone else's. And I've definitely had leaders in my team who have done that transition and who I've worked with who have really struggled with it. So I think it's something to be aware of. And we know that there's a lot of data around women waiting later to have families because they want to get their career sorted first. And there's also a lot to say that it sets you back several years when you actually go and have a baby, even if you've only taken a year off. So it's a very interesting space.
And I truly hope through these conversations that we have right now, we're highlighting an issue that and an opportunity at the exact same time.
Yeah.
I think if we look at it through the opportunity lens, then we'll get growth in this space as well.
Definitely.
So, exciting times. Kendall, as we come to the end of our podcast, I've heard so many rich themes from you around the opportunity for our staff who are considering leadership to really take that chance to have that conversation with a leader in their school community, to potentially start to network, to really look at what are the opportunities for themselves to understand more about leadership and continue to start the journey and join us at Catholic Education Sandhurst as we offer more leadership opportunities over the years. But why does school leadership matter for you?
I think school leadership's at the foundation of everything that we do. I don't think you could say that you're a teacher without being a school leader. And we're so aware of the fact that we've got these young people in front of us that are so impressionable and they're looking to us to lead them. They're looking to us to model. They're looking at how we interact with our colleagues and how we lead others. And I just think it's such an important space that is so integral to everything that we do as we shape the society and the future society. Like, it's really significant and really important work that we do. So leadership is the key to everything, really. So Darta, what does school leadership mean to you?
I think it's one of the most important pillars across our schools. We know that there's been a period of time where I think people were a little bit nervous about going into leadership, and we all know that the data highlighted that we were seeing less people applying for principal roles, deputy principal roles. And I think there's a story there around formation, that we didn't do the work needed and necessary as a system to form our leaders and to support our schools to form their leaders. We've very much left it up to the local school to do their work as best they can, coming up with all those challenges we heard you have as a SIL. Just hearing those stories, sometimes you wonder, where's the opportunities to develop leadership when we've got so much going on? And as we've said recently this week, so many balls in the air at this time of the year. How do you look at formation? So I think we're in a real opportunity now for us to form. So it is an absolute pillar. It's a building block of us creating greater opportunities for our staff to grow and, importantly, our students to grow. So when we say every school, every student, every teacher, we're also talking about everyone in our schools. And leadership is something we hope that everyone takes that opportunity as we continue to grow. So that's why school leadership matters to me. Kendall, thanks so much for being a guest today. I really do, as I said, look forward to a further conversation when you're back on deck. For us in School Leadership Matters podcast, this is our first episode. Really excited to have this out and about. Thanks everyone for joining us. Look forward to touching base in our next podcast. Happy days.